A car with no driver at the wheel. A man who just said a name he shouldn't have. And somewhere ahead, in a hangar most people in Silo 18 don't even know exists, someone has been waiting a very long time for this exact moment. This is Silo Season 3, Episode 6, and what happens to Daniel and Helen next might just rewrite everything we thought we understood about who really controls the silos. So let's talk about the moment that ended Episode 5, because it's the kind of scene that changes how you watch everything that comes after it. Daniel thought he was being careful. He picked up Helen quietly, got into a car he'd rented under Cash's name, and figured that was enough to stay off the radar. For a few minutes, it probably felt like it worked. Then he said one name out loud, P.T. Stenson, and the car stopped listening to him. That's the detail that should sit with you longer than it probably did in the moment. This wasn't the malfunction. It wasn't bad luck. The vehicle recognized a specific trigger and responded to it instantly, which means somewhere in that car, or somewhere far beyond it, something has been listening this entire time, waiting for exactly that word to be spoken. Once it heard it, the car didn't slow down or pull over. It took control and started driving toward a destination neither Daniel nor Helen chose. That's not a glitch. That's a system working precisely the way it was designed to. So who is P.T. Stenson, and why does simply saying his name carry that much weight? Within the world of the show, he's positioned as one of the loudest voices pushing for artificial intelligence to be trusted, expanded, and integrated into how society functions. That alone would make him a person of interest. But Daniel didn't bring him up randomly. He connected Stenson to the Iran mission, the operation that got 3 people killed and very nearly took his sister Charlotte's life while she was serving on the Nimitz. That's a serious accusation to make out loud, especially in a world where we now know conversations aren't as private as people assume. The instant reaction from the car tells us Daniel touched something real. You don't get automated intervention like that over an idle theory. You get it when someone has hit a nerve that powerful people intended to keep buried. Now, here's where the official episode synopsis becomes genuinely important. We're told that Daniel and Helen are going to receive a proposition. Not a threat, not an arrest, not an interrogation. A proposition. That word choice matters. It suggests whoever is behind this doesn't see them as enemies to eliminate, at least not yet. It suggests they see something in Daniel and Helen worth negotiating with. And when you pair that with the released episode imagery, which appears to show the car heading toward what looks like an airplane hangar, the pieces start forming a clearer picture. This isn't a kidnapping in the traditional sense. This feels engineered, deliberate, almost like an invitation dressed up as an abduction. If Stenson really is waiting at that hangar, then Episode 6 may finally answer a question the show has been circling since the season began. Just how far does his influence actually reach? Because if he has the ability to remotely seize control of a random rental vehicle the moment his name is mentioned, that's not the power of a wealthy public figure with strong opinions about technology. That's the power of someone with direct access to a surveillance and control network most people don't even know exists. And if that's true, it raises an uncomfortable follow-up question. Was Stenson simply monitoring Daniel, or is he connected to something much bigger, something tied to the very system that governs life inside every one of the 50 silos? That thought alone is worth sitting with for a second. Because if the silos are run by an algorithm, something has to be feeding that algorithm its rules, its priorities, its sense of what counts as a threat worth eliminating. Something had to build it. Someone had to decide what it protects and what it's willing to sacrifice. If Stenson had a hand in that creation, then this proposition to Daniel and Helen isn't just about buying their silence. It could be about recruitment. It could be about offering them a role inside the very structure they've spent this entire season trying to expose. Let's shift to Helen for a moment, because her situation carries a different kind of weight than Daniel's. She isn't a decorated war hero. She doesn't have his political history or his name recognition. And that might actually be the most important thing to understand about her going into this episode. If Stenson's operation is selective about who it brings into the fold, Helen's inclusion in this proposition tells us something. Either she matters more than we've realized, or she's simply valuable as leverage over the man sitting next to her. There's a piece of footage from the wider season trailer worth revisiting here. Helen is shown walking into what looks like a bright, almost idyllic presentation space. Green grass, blue sky, people smiling around her. It doesn't look like anything we've seen inside a silo before, and that's precisely what makes it unsettling once you know what these silos actually are. Around her neck is a lanyard with the number 18 on it. If that scene belongs to this stretch of episodes, it suggests Helen may be walking straight into some kind of orientation, possibly even witnessing the earliest version of Silo 18 before it became the World Jewels, and everyone else grew up inside. Think about what that would mean. Helen could be seeing the Silo project at its origin point, back when it was still being sold as something hopeful, a controlled, protected future, rather than a prison built to look like a shelter. That contrast between the warmth of that trailer footage and the surveillance-heavy, fear-driven reality we've watched unfold across 3 seasons is exactly the kind of gap this show loves to exploit. If Helen is being shown the sales pitch version of the silos, the audience already knows the ending she doesn't. And that dramatic irony alone could make her scenes some of the most quietly devastating material this season delivers. Now here's a bigger question worth asking, and it's one the show has never directly answered. Why 50 silos? If the goal was simply survival, a handful of shelters built to withstand fallout would have made the point. 50 is a number that suggests something closer to controlled variation, almost like separate experiments running in parallel. Different populations, different social structures, different rules, all monitored by the same underlying system. If artificial intelligence is genuinely involved in managing this project, it's not unreasonable to wonder whether it's tracking outcomes across all 50 locations at once, essentially running a long-term study on which version of humanity holds together the longest under pressure. That idea sounds extreme on its surface, but the show has already given us reasons to take it seriously. We know the silos operate under strict algorithmic control. We know violations are met with brutal, immediate consequences. We know information is tightly rationed and history is rewritten to keep people compliant. A system built with that level of precision doesn't sound like a rescue effort thrown together during a crisis. It sounds like something planned well in advance, with contingencies for failure already built into the design. If that's the case, then the real horror of Silo isn't just what happens inside the walls. It's the possibility that everyone living there is part of a calculation nobody ever agreed to. Which brings us back to Daniel and why his proposition is likely to look completely different from Helen's. His resume reads like something built for exactly this kind of project. Military service, political experience, a public reputation as a hero, thanks to what happened in Louisiana. If Stenson or whoever is running this operation is looking for someone to help legitimize or lead a piece of it, Daniel checks almost every box. And there's something else worth pointing out, something that's been quietly nagging at fans since Bernard first spoke about the algorithm governing the silos. The tone, the phrasing, even the underlying logic of how that system communicates has drawn comparisons to how Daniel himself talks and thinks. That could be coincidence. Shows plant red herrings all the time. But if it isn't a coincidence, it opens up a possibility far stranger than a simple job offer. What if Daniel isn't just being recruited to help build the future of the silos? What if some version of him already shaped the one that exists 350 years later? That's a heavy question to carry into episode 6, and it's exactly the kind of tension Silo tends to let simmer instead of resolving right away. While Daniel and Helen are being pulled toward whatever waits for them at that hangar, another storyline has been quietly building toward a breaking point, and it centers on a marriage that was never built to survive this kind of pressure. Robert Sims has spent this season in a position that should be impossible to sustain. He's sworn to protect the silo and the system that runs it, yet he's also the person who couldn't bring himself to kill Bernard, the person who's been shielding him instead of turning him in. That's not the behavior of a man fully loyal to the algorithm anymore. That's the behavior of someone who's already started pulling away from it, even if he hasn't said it out loud. Then there's the moment that might end up defining his fate. Sims hands Jules the Pez relic, one of the most recognizable objects in the entire show, and he does it out in the open in a public space, surrounded by the kind of environment where cameras and watchful eyes are simply part of daily life. If the system governing Silo 18 is anywhere near as thorough as everything we've seen suggests, that exchange didn't happen unnoticed. It's hard to imagine a silo this tightly monitored missing something so visible, which means the real question isn't whether Sims was seen. It's what happens now that he has been. This is where Camille becomes the emotional center of the episode, whether the show frames it that way explicitly or not. She's spent this season positioned as someone deeply loyal to order, to procedure, to keeping the silo functioning the way it's supposed to. But her husband has been quietly working against that same system, and if his actions come to light, she's the one left holding an impossible decision. Does she protect the structure she's spent her life serving, even if it means turning against the man she loves? Or does she protect Robert, knowing that choice could put her and possibly their son directly in danger? There's no version of this that ends comfortably for her, and that's exactly why it works. The show isn't just building toward a death. It's building toward a choice that will define who Camille really is underneath all that discipline. If Sims does meet his end this season, and there's a strong case to be made that his arc has reached the point where redemption and consequence finally collide, it likely won't come from a dramatic confrontation. It's far more likely to come from Camille herself, making an impossible call to protect everyone else in the silo, even if it costs her everything personally. That's the kind of ending this show tends to favor. Quiet, devastating, and rooted in relationships rather than action. Meanwhile, on a very different track, Paul Billings and Hank are finally getting real screen time again after being mostly absent, and the mystery in front of them ties back to something that's been simmering since earlier this season, the death connected to critical supply and the ongoing thefts nobody has been able to explain. There are a couple of directions this could go. One theory floating around suggests the missing supplies might not even be coming from inside Silo 18 at all, that another silo entirely could be responsible, quietly pulling resources through channels nobody's monitoring closely enough. It's a compelling idea, and if the show is serious about expanding this world beyond a single silo, this would be a clever way to start proving these communities aren't as isolated as they're told they are. The more grounded possibility points closer to home, toward Ed Harwood, his daughter Glenda, and the tangled history involving Glenda's former relationship. These characters haven't been given much screen time, but the show rarely introduces new faces this deliberately without a reason. Established tension, a personal history, and Ed Harwood's position overseeing the mines all line up a little too neatly to be coincidence. Whatever Billings and Hank uncover here likely connects back to that earlier death, and it may finally start explaining why supplies have been disappearing in the first place. There's also a smaller thread worth watching closely. Martha, Shirley, and Knox recently learned that communication with other silos has actually been possible all along. They simply hadn't been using the right frequencies. With Bernard now operating from the shadows, there's a real chance this episode starts pushing toward contact with one of the other 49 silos, something the show has hinted at without ever fully committing to. And somewhere out there, Solo is still unaccounted for, a loose thread the trailer already confirmed will matter eventually. What makes episode 6 feel so significant isn't just one storyline colliding into place, it's how many of them seem to be reaching their breaking point at the exact same time. Daniel and Helen are walking into a proposition that could reshape everything they thought they understood about the silos. Camille may be forced into the hardest decision of her life, and Billings and Hank might be closing in on an answer that connects directly back to the people this season has quietly been building up as the real threat all along. Whatever happens next, it's clear this show is done easing into its bigger reveals. It's starting to collide with them head-on. If you're just as invested in figuring out where Silo goes from here, let me know down in the comments which theory you think is closest to the truth. Hit like if this breakdown helped you see episode 6 a little differently, and subscribe if you want to be here the moment episode 6 actually airs, because based on everything we've just gone through, this next episode might change the way you see this entire show.